Hey guys, for those of you who have meditated for a while, one thing is very clear. There is a lot of interest in jhana and jhana practices in general. In fact, pretty much all of my most popular videos are about jhanas. The problem is there are at least 40 different types of jhanas, and every teacher has created his or her own way to reach jhana. It should be quite clear that not all of them can be what the Buddha ultimately taught, because they are so different in nature. But how did the Buddha teach jhana, and why do so many people willingly radiate towards other practices that are quite the opposite of jhana? Well, let us find out today. But first, here are a few well-known examples. We have the jhanas of Lee Brasington and his teacher Ayakema. We have at least 4 different types of jhanas from the Mind Illuminated book alone. We have the jhanas of Gunaratana, the Visuddhimagga book jhanas, and the Hindu absorption style jhanas. And lastly, we have the jhanas of people like Ajahn Brahm, who differ in their teachings to quite a considerable extent from his own teacher Ajahn Chah, who also taught some kind of jhana, I guess. And then we have the much less popular momentary concentration jhanas of people like Sayadaw and Tong and Yuta Dhammo. And of course, lastly, we have the jhanas from the Suttas, which are also quite different. We can now sort all those jhanas into rough groups. We have the absorption style that ignores everything unpleasant, and we have the pleasure style that is defined by nice feelings on different scales. We have the momentary concentration style, and lastly the Buddha jhanas, so 4 different things. And the uninstructed person only knows one way to deal with arisen suffering, and that is to engage with some kind of sensuality, to make himself feel good in some way or another. And the worldling must always do something to get something to feel better than before. And the person who has access to true Buddha jhana is beyond that and does not have to do anything like that anymore. This is the baseline and something that we should keep in mind. But the problem with almost all modern jhanas is that they rely on cherry picking or much more newer books like the Visuddhimagga and much more modern traditions. If we go by the Buddha himself, he called most of those styles of practice over, under, and miss meditation, just to name a handful of suttas. There is Anguttara Nikaya number 11.10, where the Buddha compares a meditator, a foolish meditator, with a horse who is just intent on fodder before him. Fodder, fodder. The horse is always repeating to himself. And you can always meditate like that. Or in Majjhima Nikaya number 50, the Buddha, or the Sutta, compares an absorption meditator with a predatory animal who is just sitting in front of a mouse hole and waiting for the prey to come out, just waiting for the pleasure to come out. And the Buddha called this meditation with a partner, meditation with sensuality. And in Anguttara Nikaya number 5.29, he explained that he can attain his jhanas while walking meditation. In Anguttara Nikaya number 8.30, he explained that because of his jhana, his rough robes and the food that he eats, coarse food and disgusting bitter medicine, will feel divine because of the mind that is in jhana. And in Anguttara Nikaya number 3.63, he compared his jhanas with a divine and celestial bed. He can do whatever he wishes in that sutta, and it will always feel divine because of the mind that is established in jhana. He called it meditation with a partner if you don't have that. And there are lots of other suttas that contradict the absorption style of jhana. As an example, Majjhima Nikaya number 111, there Sariputta explains his analysis of the jhanic states. And there are countless factors. And if there are countless factors, you cannot be absorbed in any of them. Otherwise, there would be a stark contradiction. And the Sariputta in the sutta named all the factors of all the jhanas that are all there at the same time. And whenever the Buddha explained mindfulness, and mindfulness is one of the big factors of jhana, then he explained a very clear knowledge, a very clear awareness of everything that is going on. And that is clearly not an absorbed state of mind. But those should be enough examples. If you have any questions concerning that, feel free to ask below. But if we want to find out what the Buddha really meant by jhana, we have to take all the suttas into account and then generalize from them. We should not cherry pick. If we just pick the ones that we like, we are simply applying our own biases to the suttas and try to make them fit. We try to make them support what we are doing anyway. So we are trying to fit our own views onto the suttas and simply make the jhanas from the suttas into what we do anyway. And this is truly not the right way to go about things. That is deeply unscientific, and that should be avoided at all costs. We should first have a look at the suttas and then generalize from them and find a way of practicing jhanas that is in line with all the suttas and not just with a handful of them or just the stock phrases or something like that. But anyway, let us now name all the different key facts the Buddha named when it comes to jhana. First, he said, jhana is there to overcome craving through restraining lust. He sometimes called jhana non-lust, as opposed to the Brahma Viharas, which are non-hate. And jhana is the last part of the Noble Eightfold Path, shortly before Nibbana. And jhana cannot be without virtue and the prior training on the path, because in essence you have to first restrain yourself, restrain your lustful behavior, before you can be free by default from any type of lust. And they are entirely wholesome, and you experience a true relief which is apart from sensuality. You experience relief to be free from all kinds of feelings, of no longer being pressured by feelings. And this is what the Buddha meant by the freedom from the hindrances, feeling like freedom from debt, freedom from disease, freedom from slavery, surviving a dangerous trip through the desert, being free from a prison house. All those things. This is a feeling of jhana, the feeling of freedom from the hindrances. And they are based on seclusion from sensuality, from lust and unwholesome states, because unwholesome states always come as a package. All the hindrances are bundled as one. If you weaken your lust, you will always also weaken your hatred. And if you weaken your hatred, you will always also weaken your lust. And there is never in the entire Pali Canon any recipe-style approach that you can do to enter jhana. Not a single one. The Buddha never gave any recipe. He always said, abandon sensuality, abandon the unwholesome states, and then a monk naturally enters jhana. And all the path factors kind of culminate in the jhanas. And they are explained in many different ways. You can attain them in countless ways. You just have to make sure that the basic principles are abided by, namely that you stop doing all those things that go against jhana. And when you stop doing all those things, jhana is a natural result. So basically it is a mindfulness of the central domain, mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the danger of sensuality. And then the mind will withdraw from that domain and you will automatically enter jhana. And the Buddha gave the simile when it comes to the feeling of the freedom from the hindrances. And it pretty much goes as follows. A monk sees the 5 hindrances respectively as a debt, as a disease, as a prison house, as slavery, as a road across a dangerous desert. But when the 5 hindrances have been abandoned in himself, he sees that as freedom from debt, healthiness, release from prison, freedom from slavery, and a land of safety. And this is from Majjhima Nikaya, number 39, if you want to read it up. And many people mistake the freedom and the temporary absence of certain things. Imagine being a prisoner who behaved very well in prison and has 1 or 2 hours of free walking time outside each day. Is he free? Think about that. Of course, he's not free. He's not free at all. He's only really free when he can go wherever he pleases. But he could still, well, if he is truly free, he could still misbehave and have to go back to prison. So just being free from the hindrances does not mean that you can never experience the hindrances again. But if you are truly free, you don't have to go back. It is not just for 1 or 2 hours on the meditation cushion. You are free all the time then, unless you choose to go against it and return to prison again. So this is also very important to keep in mind. And then the Buddha also gave us a simile on what the first jhana is like. And I will just read it to you so that you can think about it a bit and have more context available. We will analyze it in the last part of the video in a lot of depth, and then all of this will likely make a lot of sense. And the simile, the standard simile, goes as follows. Here, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, quite secluded from unwholesome states, a monk enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought and pondering, with mental ease and bodily pleasure born of the seclusion. He makes the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of seclusion drench, steep, fill, and pervade his body, so that there is no part of the whole body unpervaded by that mental ease and bodily pleasure born of seclusion. And then he continues this, just as a skilled bathman or bathman's apprentice heaps bath powder into a metal basin and sprinkles it gradually with water, kneads it till the ball is wet through and through, and the bath powder soaks in and pervades it inside out, yet the ball itself does not ooze. So too, a monk makes the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of seclusion drench, steep, fill, pervade this body, so that there is no part of the whole body unpervaded by the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of seclusion, which is from Majjhima Nikaya 77, in case you want to read it up. And the first thing to notice is that the pleasure of the jhanas is a pleasure of seclusion, and the Buddha was very clear about that. It is not a pleasure of the jhanas. And many people translate that wrongly. There can be pleasure in meditation without that pleasure being a jhana. As an example, there is a joy of giving, freedom from remorse, satisfaction, mental joy, calmness of the body, bodily pleasure, and lastly samadhi, which isn't even a full jhana, which is, by the way, explained in Anguttara Nikaya number 8.11. And it is very important to keep in mind that there are many types of joy and pleasure and calm that can arise in meditation that are not even close to any type of jhana. But if you are just starting out and have never experienced anything like that before, then from your perspective it is the best thing you have ever experienced, and it must be the jhana. But they are not. They are just super nice meditation experiences, which is also great, by the way. It is a very good sign that you can experience those things, but it's good to not leap out and immediately assume that it must be a jhana just because it feels nice. There can be countless nice feeling states that are not a jhana at all. But anyway, let us now come to the meat of the modern misunderstanding concerning jhanas. The Buddha named two preconditions that are automatically followed by the first jhana once met: thoroughly distancing yourself from lust and a big distance from unwholesome states. And those two are also kind of the same thing, namely, it is just that the non-lust is a vehicle to also achieve the others. And most people just glance over those two without giving them a second thought. Yet the entire practice is contained in there. This is a culmination of Dhamma practice. And let us start with sensuality. What did the Buddha even mean by it? Well, in Anguttara Nikaya, number 6.63, he offers a lot of insight in it. He said that lustful intentions are a man's sensuality, not the beautiful things in the world. Beautiful things remain as they are in the world, while the wise removes the desire for them. And what are lustful intentions? Well, all intentions or choices that are rooted or directed towards getting something. This is a lustful intention. If you are motivated to get something, then you are acting out of craving. Then you are acting out of lust. And this is truly what sensuality is. Sensuality is not in the things. Drugs are in themselves not really sensual. It is always your desire toward drugs that makes them sensual. And this is so hard to understand for many people. And this is one of the things why most people never make any progress, because they cannot wrap their head around that concept, that the same action, for example, can be sensual for one person and non-sensual for another, simply because that person has no desire for certain things. For them, it is not sensual at all. For the other person, their entire world revolves around that. And this is very important to keep in mind. And to make it even a bit more clear, there cannot be any lust before the jhana for the jhana. Craving always happens before something and pressures you to do something. If there is even a trace of wanting left in your experience, what you have is not even the first jhana, according to the Buddha. You thus must be free from the pressure of all the sensual domain in their entirety. This is why it's called sensuality, because when you are indulged in sensuality, you are pressured by your senses to do certain things. You further must be able to know and see your intentions of greed, aversion, and delusion with great clarity. Otherwise, you cannot restrain those bad behaviors. You will never even notice that you are addicted. If you never say no to your urges and impulses that drag you into the sensual domain, then you will never notice that you are dragged around. It is a bit like that you are walking very big dogs, and whenever they run around to get something, you just run with them to not have to withstand the pull that the dogs have on you. And if you just stand your ground and avoid getting pulled by the dog, you will notice how much pull there really is. And this is an absolutely necessary precondition to even notice that there is something wrong with your condition. So if your eyes or ears drag you towards something, you must resist that urge. And then you can notice, oh, I am really addicted to certain things, and those are lustful intentions, and you must make them visible and restrain them to even see them, and then you can try to find a way out of that. And most people who claim to practice jhana cannot even see their intentions at all. And as that is an absolutely necessary precondition to even notice that you are addicted, then your type of jhana practice, if you do it like that, is very likely just something that also was created by craving. And jhana is kind of freedom from craving. So it cannot be the jhana that the Buddha was talking about. So it's good to reflect on that, by the way, because the closer we get to the real Buddha jhanas, the better, because they truly are entirely wholesome. And just to give you a simile that hopefully shows how misguided some jhana practices are, here is a small thought experiment. Imagine a person who has a busy day, is learned in meditation and meditates a few hours each day and feels super nice while doing it. He looks forward to that kind of meditation and anticipates it. The entire day revolves around their meditation schedule. While he meditates, there is indeed no craving at all, and he thinks himself to be a jhana meditator. Pretty nice lifestyle. And now imagine a second person. He is heavily addicted to heroin. He craves his drug a lot. He goes through a lot of stress each day to beg for some money, to buy some drugs, and smokes them later. Once he smokes it on a tinfoil, and many people do not know that, but most people actually smoke heroin before they start injecting. Well, once he smokes it on a tinfoil, he is completely free from craving. For hours on end, feels light like a feather, untouchable, warm, cozy, completely free, and like in heaven. And now, maybe think about what is the fundamental difference between those two kinds of behaviors. Well, fundamentally, there is no difference. The first person does certain things to get something, and the second person does certain things to get something. The first practice is surely more refined and more fine and less harmful to the body, but the overarching fundamental principle remains completely the same. There is no difference. One person has a craving towards something, satisfies it, and afterwards experiences bliss and freedom from craving. Well, freedom from craving, the temporary absence of craving, and the other person too. And now to the second aspect. What is unwholesome, and how can we be secluded from it? Well, the most general definition of unwholesome would be going against the natural order of things stated in dependent origination. Or, well, acting against reality, pretty much. Everything unwholesome has the wrong order of self first and the rest second. You could also define unwholesome as going against the principle of Dhamma or non-self or anicca, impermanence. And what is that? Well, every action that is based on or rooted in aversion and delusion and additionally lust, but we already had that. Or in short, all actions that produce self. Those are unwholesome things. And even in the first jhana, there is no self at all. But the underlying tendency for self to re-arise, that is still there. And that remains standing, and only the insights and the wisdom that the Buddha taught can get that out of the way. And all the jhanas are entirely wholesome, and even the first jhana is very much withdrawn from both sensuality and everything unwholesome. So they are withdrawn in the first jhana from lust, from hatred, and from the urge to distract yourself. And you can easily check that. Get seated in the middle of the room, do nothing at all, don't meditate, don't distract yourself in any way. And if that feels divine and like bliss to you, then you are very likely in the first jhana. But if you always have the urge to do something, anything, then it's very unlikely that you are in the first jhana. And further, the first jhana is accompanied by thinking and pondering. And the Buddha even named those two things as the defining characteristic of the first jhana. The Buddha basically defined the first jhana as freedom from speech. And by not speaking, you seclude yourself from the entire domain of the body. The mouth is kinda what we feel like connects the internal world with the physical outside world. We always live like our thoughts come from our mind through our mouth into the world and spill out there through the mouth. And when we guard that point mindfully, we will notice how the mental and the physical are actually two different things, two different domains. And when that is developed deeply on the basis of virtue, nothing in the physical world can affect us anymore. It is simply no longer ours or regarded as ours, as we see that disconnection very clearly. And those are also informations from many suttas that are typically very ignored. And what people get wrong about jhana most of the time is simply the duration of it. Many people do read the suttas and try to make sense of them. But this one is hard to get right due to so many wrong understandings, wrong views, and traditions that are no longer in line with what the Buddha taught anymore. And the Buddha never described jhana as limited to a few hours of sitting each day. He explicitly said that he can be in jhana whenever he wishes, and while doing pretty much whatever he wishes. Only speaking is kind of not allowed, which is why he called jhana, or silence, noble overall. And his monks should always speak as little as possible, because that makes jhana possible. And the Buddha even said that a person who passed away in jhana will continue to be free from suffering for many eons on end. In one case, he said that one who mastered the 7th jhana will be free for 60,000 eons on end. And if he had attained the right view, then he will be completely liberated after that time. But if he did not attain the right view, he will be very likely reborn in hell afterwards, simply because all his good karma has been used up. And now we do something that I think no one has done before. So this is quite new, well, hopefully. I cannot guarantee it though, as I obviously have not read all the Dhamma and meditation books in the world, but well, I still have not encountered anything like that. We will now take the brief stock phrase that the Buddha used most often to explain jhana practice and expand it. We take all the knowledge we have just generated about jhana and simply add it to the simple description, like you would add values into a formula in mathematics. And this works extremely well, as words are usually simply just short formulas or shortcuts for a much longer explanation or description in many cases. So this is how the stock phrase, well, normally goes, and I will just display it here for you on the screen. Well, what we see here is, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a monk enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thinking and pondering, with mental ease and bodily pleasure born of seclusion. And all the important terms or changes that I make to this phrase, I will highlight in orange. So keep that in mind. So first of all, this is kind of hard to understand for beginners, and it's not entirely clear what is meant here. So let us make a few changes. So first, the quite secluded part is not so clear. So let us replace it to make it a thoroughly secluded from sensual pleasures, thoroughly secluded from unwholesome states. A practitioner, because it's not just monks, lay people can do it too, a practitioner enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is with thinking and pondering, which clearly has thinking and pondering, not wispy and in the background. It is there. It is a defining characteristic. So this is also important to keep in mind. And it is with mental ease and bodily pleasure caused by the seclusion. The pleasure is because you are secluded and not because of the jhana. You can experience great pleasure without that state being a jhana. In fact, most kinds of pleasure are not at all the pleasure of a jhana or the pleasure of anything like that. It is just pleasure. Pleasure follows the principle of feeling good. The jhanas feel good as a byproduct and not so much as something that is a defining characteristic of the jhanas. And in fact, the more higher the jhanas go, the less pleasant they are. They become more and more neutral over time. And the longer you dwell in the first jhana, the more neutral it will be. And people cannot wrap their head around that. Why could a neutral state be regarded as something nice? But again, the Buddha said so. So Buddha says the neutral feeling is the best feelings of them all for a noble one, for someone who has understood that neutral feeling. And now we can go even further. Here, thoroughly secluded from lustful intentions, as we have understood from Anguttara Nikaya number 6.63. So we can replace the sensuality part by that to make it even more clear what is meant. And sensuality is your lustful intentions towards sights, sounds, smells, taste, touches, and thoughts about sights, sounds, taste, smell, touches, and so on. So we are secluded from those lustful intentions. And for that to happen, we must obviously know what our lustful intentions are. We must be able to see them. Otherwise, we cannot, restrain them. We cannot be secluded from them. It would be like a coin flip. And we cannot really do that so often in a row to end up in a jhana by accident. It cannot work like that. But for some people, it is still even a bit too difficult to understand. So we can expand it even further. Here, thoroughly secluded from acting out of intentions of greed, and also secluded from acting out of unwholesome states of aversion and delusion, a practitioner enters upon and abides in the first jhana. So what I did now is highlight the restraint part. We no longer go after those lustful intentions, and we also no longer go after the hateful intentions and the distracting intentions as a byproduct. By weakening lust, we also weaken our tendency to hate and to distract ourselves. And delusion is a very active thing. It is not just non-knowledge or something like that. It is an attitude of actively ignoring certain parts of our experience, namely the pressure to do anything at all. This is more or less a very fitting translation of delusion. But yeah, for some people, it is still a bit too abstract, so we can go even further. We can now replace it again by the following: not having wanted to gain pleasure through the six senses, not having wanted to avoid pain through the six senses, and not having tried to distract himself for a very long time, a practitioner enters upon and abides in the first jhana. And we can take that from Samyutta Nikaya number 36.6. One who practices correctly does not shy away from pain, does not seek pleasure, and does not avoid the neutral feeling. This is how a noble disciple experiences feelings, as the Buddha said in that sutta. So we try to cultivate joy in the neutral feeling and try to no longer avoid the other types of feelings. Just allow them to be there. And then, when we are sufficiently established in that state of mind, then jhana can naturally arise. And we can now continue with the rest. And now we come to the part that is also very misunderstood. So when the first part is clear, a practitioner automatically enters and lives in the first jhana. So this is also very important. It is not something that we have to do. It is something that automatically happens to us. For example, in Anguttara Nikaya number 11.2, the Buddha explains that all the states, the virtue, the samadhi, the insight, those states naturally arise one after the other. The monk who is doing those practices does not have to form the wish, the Buddha said, to enter those states. It is only natural for those states to arise. Those are his words. And this is also something that is often ignored. I don't think I ever encountered those descriptions in anyone's jhana instructions or methods or techniques. And then he enters and lives in the first jhana. It is vihare in that description. And abides in comes from that word, and it literally means lives in. And the Buddha could be in jhana at pretty much all times, and he said so. In, for example, the Sutta about the divine and luxurious bed, which is also very important to keep in mind. So it's not just a state that he was in for an hour a day. It was a state he was abiding in pretty much always. And this is also very clear from the suttas, so we can insert it here. The Buddha never contradicted himself, which is also very important to keep in mind. But then we can go a bit further, because when he lives in jhana, it is with purified verbal thinking and verbal explaining to himself, but without breaking into speech. And those are from Majjhima Nikaya number 111 and Majjhima Nikaya number 44. So there is a lot of thinking going on, but as there is no unwholesome, it is purified thinking. It is thinking about the right topics. It is bringing the right things to mind and explaining to yourself in the right way so that you can actually understand the Dhamma further. But it is without breaking into speech. So you cannot speak in the jhana. The thinking, the mental thinking and pondering, the verbal speaking mind in your voice, that is still there. But you no longer speak out into the world. You no longer break out into the physical domain by means of speech. So this is also very important. It is a defining characteristic. In a sense, you even use your thinking and pondering as a vehicle to enter the first jhana by establishing the mindfulness of the non-speaking mouth. You think and ponder while you are very aware of the fact that you are not speaking. And given the right foundation of virtue, then jhana has to be the result of that. But we can go even further. Now we come to the pleasure aspect of the jhanas. The sutta continues, which is with an extraordinary relief, akin to escaping certain deaths for some time after its initial arising, which is from Majjhima Nikaya number 39, as well as with bodily pleasure born of seclusion. So there, the Buddha explained that the freedom from the hindrances feels like freedom from debt, freedom from disease, freedom from slavery, escaping a prison, surviving a dangerous trip through a desert. Those are types of relief. It is a supreme relief that you are still alive, that you are still unaffected. It is not something that is akin to taking cocaine or something. It is not an orgasmic kind of pleasure. It is a true relief that comes from escaping certain deaths, so to speak. You are no longer touched by old age, sickness, and death in jhana. You transcended those domains. And well, accordingly, a supreme kind of relief will have to be the result. And sukha, as an example, is the opposite of dukkha and just means ease or the absence of unease. And when there is knowledge of, well, the release, so to speak, of the jhana, then the knowledge of the neither good nor bad feeling will feel kind of sublime. So when you are no longer pressured by any feeling, it will be a very, very strong feeling of release, but it will be a byproduct of all of this. And now we can expand it even further to make it a bit more clear. And now I will read the whole thing to you. Not having wanted to gain pleasure through the six senses, not having wanted to avoid pain through the six senses, and not having wanted to distract himself for a very long time, a practitioner automatically enters and lives in the first jhana, which is with purified verbal thinking and verbally explaining to himself, but without breaking into speech, which is accompanied by the extraordinary relief of no longer being affected by both good and bad feelings, and having learned to experience the absence of good and bad feelings as the most sublime thing, as well as experiencing bodily pleasures caused by seclusion in a detached manner. And this is now the more or less complete formulation of the first jhana when we insert all the information that are available to us in the suttas. So it is all about feeling in the right way. You are no longer affected by good and bad feelings, so you are no longer pressured towards this or that, towards avoiding certain things that are painful, towards wanting more of the lustful things. And as a result, you experience the neutral feeling where you are not pressured at all as a true relief. So you have learned and cultivated the experience as something good when there are no good and bad feelings. Then you are not pressured at all, have nothing to endure, and you are just there abiding in perfect peace, which is the most sublime thing. And as a result, the body will experience pleasure for some time, but the pleasure will be experienced in a very detached manner, which is also very clear from Samyutta Nikaya number 36.6, where the Buddha explains that the jhanas and the feelings that the Noble One experiences are very detached. The Noble One, who has understood the practice, always experiences feelings in a detached manner. So those feelings of the Noble Ones are not the same that you are used to if you are just starting in your meditative journey. And this is a very complete, explanation of the first jhana, which might be much more relatable than most of the descriptions that are available to most people nowadays. And now we can make it brief again. For example, having diligently and rightly done the gradual training that the Buddha explained for a very long time, a practitioner automatically has the first jhana as his lifestyle, in which there is still purified verbal thinking and pondering, with an initial burst of release and bodily pleasure that comes from seclusion as a byproduct. This could be a very brief formulation of the stock phrase of the jhanas, and this is what I like to go by, because it is in line with all the suttas, and not just with some suttas. So this is also very important. But anyway, let us now continue. But what does all of this practically mean? Well, we can make a short test to show you how close you are to the true Buddha jhanas, and it is surprisingly simple. Quite literally, try to do nothing at all. Sit in an empty room, close all doors and windows, remove all possibilities of distraction, and then just sit. Don't meditate, don't distract yourself, do nothing at all for an hour or two on end. Chances are that you cannot even do that for a few minutes. Don't meditate, by the way. Also, don't follow any formal meditation. This will be a supreme difficult test for the mind. The mind will throw all kinds of urges and impulses at you left and right, and you will give in to them after a while. However, this giving in is what sensuality is. You are pressured towards acting. You are pressured towards interacting with the sensual domain. And this horrible pressure to do something, that is what sensuality is. And once that fades, you will automatically be in the first jhana, where you are no longer pressured by that freakishly bad feeling urge to interact with the sensual domain in any way. And this style of, meditation is basically all you must do to enter jhana. Just not doing those things that result in dependence of action. While it is super simple to give you that one rule, it is the hardest thing in the world to implement. In fact, this should make very clear why the Buddha called his practice the most difficult thing in the world. He said it is easier to defeat 1,000 armies than to defeat the self. And the self is what relies on action. You can be in an empty room only with distraction. If you sit and endure first all impulses that are based on lust and aversion, and later all impulses to distract yourself, then you will automatically be in jhana. There is no other way. This is the easiest test that I know of. That said, this figure that I will show you in a moment should vividly illustrate how much you have to do before you even come close to the real jhanas. And here it is. I will probably show that to you in another video. But what is here is the timeline from the layman phase to the Noble One phase. And what you must do here is incrementally accumulating more and more things. It is not that you first do virtue and enduring and precepts and all those things. You keep doing those things all the time. And then they ripen and grow into the more advanced practices. It is not a linear succession of steps. It is that the virtue becomes your samadhi, and your samadhi, if you cultivate it rightly, then becomes your jhana. And then wisdom automatically arises if you do all things right. So in the beginning you endure, keep the 5 precepts, read lots of books, abandon your wrong views and your wrong understandings about jhana. And then you start seeking good people, read suttas more, and then you actually start renouncing your dependence on the sensual interaction. And when you do that, you are secluded. You contemplate more. Samadhi arises, or your virtue becomes your samadhi. Ajahn Chah compared the entire Noble Eightfold Path with a mango. First, it is a small mango that is still growing, that is your virtue. Then it grows into something bigger, which is your samadhi. And then, in the end, it becomes a ripe mango, which is red or yellow and very tasty. And that is your jhana. but it is always the same mango. You never stop doing the virtue. If you remove the virtue, then the mango can no longer grow, and it can no longer mature into something better. So this is also very important to keep in mind. But yeah, so this is something that should be present as a knowledge at all times. Jhana is a freedom from the sensual domain. You no longer have to do anything. You no longer have to work. You no longer have to distract yourself. You feel no pressure at all to do any of those things. And then your virtue becomes more and more samadhi-like. And samadhi is just the immovability of the mind. Immovable by any kind of feeling. You are no longer pressured to do this or that to gain more pleasure or to avoid pain. You are simply at ease at all times. This is what samadhi is. And the Buddha even called jhana the imperturbable, where no feeling at all can assail you, can move the mind back into the sensual domain. This is what jhana is like. Imperturbable stableness, steadiness of mind, where no feeling can assail you anymore. And this is true freedom and the closest thing that you can have towards the real liberation of mind. But anyway, let us now come to the most important points. First, there are countless jhanas and only one can be right. Only one can be what the Buddha ultimately taught. Then virtue, and this is very important to keep in mind, is absolutely necessary to cultivate jhana. Virtue ripens into jhana like a small mango ripens into a big one. It is a culmination of the path. It is called a fruition. It becomes something else. It is not that you, I don't know, first have to do some virtue for some time, then you can stop doing it, and then you focus on your meditation method, and then the jhana arises. That is not how it works. It is all about stopping to do those things that are harmful for the mango. You don't sprinkle poisonous water on the roots. You stop doing those things, and then the mango will naturally grow into something better and into something very enjoyable. And jhana automatically arises when fully secluded from sensuality and unwholesome states. You don't have to do any extra steps that follow it. It just matters what you don't do. You stop doing anything that is harmful. You stop doing the lustful intentions and the hateful intentions and the destructive intentions. Those are very much restrained, and as a result, jhana will arise. And overall, jhana is a lifestyle, a mode of being that is completely free from sensuality for weeks, months, years, or even eons on end. Jhana is not a temporary hour-long holiday from craving. You don't just pause your cravings for a while and then continue. If that is what you do in day-to-day life, or if that is what your jhana practice looks like, then it is not what the Buddha taught as jhana. It might still be beneficial, and it's probably much better than being a drug addict or anything like that. But if liberation of mind, if Nibbana is your goal, then you should really reevaluate your practice and make sure that it is in line with what the Buddha taught, because that is truly only leading towards liberation. It cannot have any other destination. The Buddha even said that the first jhana, as he described it, and as I try to describe it in this video, is a foundation for liberation. To completely overcome the self so that it can never arise again, you at least must be temporarily free from it. And that is what jhana is. Anyway, this should be it for today. If you still have questions remaining, feel free to ask them down below. I will gladly answer them, or feel free to join our Discord server. Then we can answer those questions there. But yeah, if there's anything else, feel free to like and subscribe and do all the other YouTube things. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.